developing merely the analytical methods for a complex biological would take longer than a year. Longer than a year to develop the methods to evaluate what you have in your hands and how it breaks down over time, how consistent it is from batch to batch, and get all of those tests and those results agreed with the regulator over 1 year, just for the manufacturing tests. It cannot be done. So when you hear Bill Gates, that wonderful scientist, telling you that the plan is to get from pathogen to vaccine in 90 days, my blood run cold.
So Dr. Mike Yeadon is the most senior former pharmaceutical research executive speaking out anywhere in the world. His first degree was a joint honours in biochemistry and toxicology, the study of how our bodies work at a molecular level and how toxic substances can injure us, also at a molecular level. As an undergraduate student, he was assigned to work at 2 UK government secret establishments, Porton Down, called the Chemical Defence Establishment, and Aldermaston, the then HQ of the National Forensic Science Service. He then conducted doctoral research into the way opiate drugs like morphine and fentanyl depress respiration. He was awarded his PhD in 1988 and worked in pharmaceutical and biotech R&D ever since. At Pfizer, Dr. Yeadon became vice president and worldwide head of research into allergic and respiratory disease therapeutics. Leaving Pfizer in 2011, Dr. Yeadon spent the next decade in biotech. He consulted to over 30 biotech companies. He also founded and led as CEO and sold his own biotech, Ziarco, to Novartis in 2017. Mike has campaigned tirelessly and entirely pro bono for almost 5 years, trying to understand what he saw early on were crimes against humanity, becoming increasingly firm in his assessment that humanity is under the most extreme threat we have ever faced. Driven by his own intolerance of injustice, he campaigned for more than a year before regaining his faith in God, the real reason he's continuing to speak out, regardless of the personal risk to himself.
Yes. So, good afternoon, Vienna, and anywhere else in the world that can hear me. Thank you for being in attendance. That tells me you've realized that what we have been told by the authorities over recent years is not true. And I say, when you detect the authorities are lying to you, you should never believe anything else they tell you. If they've lied in ways that could cost you your health or your life, they have given up any trust you might put in them. So I ask people, stop listening to liars. The official sources of information are all lies. Don't turn your television on, don't read the paper, they will be lying to you. Okay? That's a real problem. So the two main lies, you've just heard my talk about the so-called pandemic. There was no pandemic. There was no additional new cause of illness, this so-called virus. It was all a lie. And it was augmented by propaganda from the television and the deliberate misuse of a test called the PCR test. So when people had their normal illnesses, they were told, oh, you have COVID. And then when people died or were killed in hospitals or care homes, they were told, oh, they died of COVID. That is the pandemic, medical murder and misattribution, wrongly blaming as a cause of death something that doesn't exist. And that explains why your politicians and mine carried on having parties and traveling the world, attending meetings, and they would shake hands. That's not because they're brave, ladies and gentlemen. It's because they damn well knew there was nothing happening at all. That's what has happened. And they've planned this for many years. I can find evidence going back 50 years, seriously. 25 years worth of planning for pandemics on a tabletop in initially military establishments in America and eventually involving all authorities across the world, including China, the EU, and my country, Britain, as well. So pandemics don't happen. There wasn't a pandemic. There won't be a pandemic. They're immunologically impossible, but you've been lied to, so then they can frighten you, then they can take away your liberty, and then eventually persuade you to roll up your sleeve and get injected. To get injected with materials that I believe I have just demonstrated are intentionally harmful. Intentionally harmful. And the number of people killed are in the tens of millions at least. Now, if they killed enormous numbers of people in one go, we would wake up. So they've calibrated the rate of death so that over a number of years they can murder as many people as they want. So that's very important. I want to mention one other thing, and then I'm going to make a special plea. The one other thing, I mentioned evidence going back 50 years. The organization that came up with the idea of infectious diseases going out of control and moving between countries was a group called the Club of Rome. They do exist. You can look them up. They were founded by people who are so wealthy that they have foundations named after their family. That wasn't the only story, that lie that they came up with. At the same time, the same people came up with another lie, which as soon as I mention it, the penny will drop, the pfennig will drop, you will know I'm telling the truth. The other lie, they wanted a big thing that could only be addressed by operating above the level of your nation. Couldn't be solved on your own. That second lie was the lie that human release of CO2 will warm the climate to a crisis point. That is an absolute lie. I'm a good enough scientist to be able to read original scientific papers and to find people like me who've spent all their life in a particular area of research, so climate, atmospheric physics, and so on. I've spoken to those people, like me, who are censored, and they too tell me it's an absolute lie. We do not need to reduce our carbon footprints. We have not warmed the planet. We're not going to warm the planet because CO2 is such a weak greenhouse gas, it cannot possibly cause changes in temperature. The things that change temperature over time are two things: solar output variation and the variation in the orbit of the Earth. Those are the only two things that make huge differences, and you driving an electric car will make no difference to those. But if you have no petrol or diesel car, then you're restricted to the range in the battery, and worse, a remote computer can disable your vehicle and stop it being charged. That is the purpose of them. You will have heard of 15-minute cities. You will have heard you will own nothing and be happy. You know, unfortunately, there is a conspiracy. There's nothing theoretical about it. The same group of people have lied to us about pandemics so as to inject you with intentionally dangerous materials. And they've lied to you about climate so they can take over your lives, remove your freedoms, and in my view, over time, they're going to murder lots of people. I think they're actively evil, and I think they've been plotting this for a very long time. So I have one request again. Well done for being here. You are awake enough to know that you can't trust your governments or doctors ever again. Only each other, and you need to work out what's going on because no one is coming to save us. You can save yourself, nobody else is going to do it. So if you think what I've told you is plausible, You must share it with your family, your friends, people that you care about, because the media will never tell them the truth, and your friends and relatives and loved ones will never look for the truth, because it's almost 5 years and they're still asleep. So it is down to you. I'm sorry to put the burden on you, but if you don't persuade other people you care about, they will be lost and we will lose everything. So with that, I'm going to pause, and I thank you very much for listening to me and doing something with this information.
Dr. Yeadon, do you hear me?
Yes, I do. Yes, I can hear you.
Perfect. So thank you so much, Dr. Yeadon, for your time, for being here now also live. My name is Martin Rutter, and the media in Austria called me 100 times conspiracy theorist. And so, as a proved conspiracy theorist, I have some questions which will be hopefully interesting. But first of all, I'd like to say we will never ever censor anybody. We will never ever work together with any kind of globalists, no Freemasons or other enemies of the people in this world. So that's why we will never censor you or anybody else. The first question out of 4, I think, is, I'm not sure if you can answer it, but if you can, would be great. What do you think will happen next? Will there be, as Mr. Gates told us 2020, a new pandemic or something like this? And if yes, is this maybe the way the vaccination works?
Yes, so the one comment is, how would Mr. Gates know anything at all about a future health crisis? How? And the answer is, he has to be materially involved in making that happen. Ladies and gentlemen, the man he doesn't even have a college degree. He's not a biologist. He's not a doctor. So when he said, oh, there'll be a more severe pandemic, I mean, I remember when he said that, I thought, that means you're going to do it, Mr. Gates. Okay? Don't give, because he's wealthy, you shouldn't give him any credit for being able to see the future, because that's an absurd idea. So, and of course, but to your question, I don't know what they're going to do next. I'm not the crook. I don't know what they're going to do next, but I'll tell you this. They're going to bring to us at least one more crisis. And I think it'll either be a pandemic, and it'll be a lie, and yes, it could be they'll exploit toxicity of the previous injections, and they're not vaccines. No vaccine is useful, by the way. I've gone from being broadly pro-vaccine. I now know enough to say confidently your children will not benefit in any way from these injections. Don't let the doctors do it. The doctors are not to be trusted either, because almost none of them 5 years later have said anything, right? So you should be talking to philosophers, historians, bright people. Don't deal with medics, probably not scientists either, not if they're paid by the government or a corporation, because they'll be lying to you. Doesn't matter how good their reputation is, they're lying to you. So I think it's going to be one of these things. They'll lie about another pandemic, and sadly, many people will believe them, and then they'll get injected, and they'll get ill and die. Or they will precipitate a war, or they'll tell us that there's a war. So one thing, for example, if they told us that there was a limited nuclear exchange in Ukraine, none of us on this call would have any idea if that was actually true at all. So you can see how powerful and frightening that would be. So I think that's a possible scenario. Real hot war with tanks up and down your street, I suppose it's possible. The other one I think is very likely is a global financial crisis. So a colleague of mine, David Rogers Webb, who's a former hedge fund manager, has written extensively about this, and you can find his free book called The Great Taking on his website. And he thinks that there will be a precipitated global financial crisis, and most people, including me, will lose everything we own. All of our bank accounts, all of our pensions will all be stolen legally. They've made the unlawful legal on paper, and David explains how that will happen. And at that point, of course, everybody would be dependent on the government for handouts, for charity. And at that point, they'll say, oh, have you had your injections? You see, and another thing I think, so it's either war, a pretend pandemic, or a global financial crisis. Those are the most likely three. And then I think there will be a reason given why you have to have a digital ID. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I'm 64. I've got plenty of ways of being able to identify myself, to buy a house, to move across a border, to buy shopping, to register a car. So I don't need a new digital ID. I've got passports, bank statements, my own address, government ID. So why would you want a new format digital ID? And I'll tell you why. The people running this crime need it in order to control every aspect of your life. If you sign up for a new digital ID, then the next thing that will happen is you have to show it before certain transactions, like moving across a border, getting medical care, buying fuel, eventually food. And so now your digital ID has got a fatal trap in it, because they can set its validity to depend on whether you've taken the latest vaccine. If you haven't taken it, it would be like having an invalid vaccine passport. That's what I think they're going to do. A digital ID, money becoming only digital and not cash, and then you cannot resist at this point, because you can't use even the rations money that they might give you to buy the smallest amount of bread if your digital ID is invalid. And so you'll get a choice of either starve or get injected, and it will make you ill and eventually kill you. I know it sounds like a science fiction film, but it's so obvious to me. I've been watching these people for 4.5 years. They're going to do one of those things: financial crisis, war, or pretend pandemic. And they're going to introduce digital ID, and they're going to remove cash. And at that point, if we've let them do it, there's nothing you can do. Literally, they won't care if 10 million people demonstrate on the street. They'll just wait for you to go home. And, we will, if we sign up for digital ID and stop and don't speak out and let this happen, I have no idea how we could escape from that. So that's my prediction. That's what I think they're going to do, because these gene-based injections will always be toxic. It doesn't matter what they do with them. The first time I saw them, which was about 20 years ago, they were being suggested to us as novel ways to treat unusual cancers, perhaps in the brain. And the mechanism was to trigger an autoimmune attack on some tissue you couldn't reach surgically. So they knew perfectly well what they would stimulate a body to do, which is to attack everywhere that it lands and the instruction is followed. So, ladies and gentlemen, why are there factories being built everywhere, including in Germany, UK, and in Japan, to make billions of doses of this material? I think they want to inject you and your children, don't you? It's not money. Money is an enormously powerful lubricant of this process, because lots of people love money to the point they will do knowingly wrong things. Like, my family doctor has followed me online for years, and she is still injecting people in the public and their children for money, even though she knows it's wrong. She understands in what way it's wrong, but she's taking the money, drives a nice new car, and yet she seems such a lovely person. So someone said the banality of evil is what evil looks like, and it looks ordinary, looks very ordinary. people just following the rules, and and so that's what they'll do, I think. And so I've certainly explained my position, and I would say I'm operating like a detective these days, because when I look around me, I see a crime scene. It's not a scientific matter. It's certainly not a medical or public health matter. That's why I'm so annoyed we're still listening to doctors, except with the rare few that are speaking out. Thank you. Almost all doctors, 99.9% of them, have taken the money. We don't want to hear from them. What have they got to say to us that's useful? So I can tell you from my own experience, there is no question. I said over 4 years ago that unfortunately these injections are going to injure and kill people. My life changed the day I said that, and I've been censored ruthlessly ever since. So why would they do that? Why would they try to stop me speaking? I don't sound crazy. I've explained why they're dangerous. I said so before they started, and exactly what I worried would happen did happen, and it's continuing to happen. So I'm censored, of course, ladies and gentlemen, because I'm right. They are going to do it again. And the way to stop it is you must tell other people what you've learned today. Because the people you love who are still asleep, the government's going to lie to them, and they'll keep pretending everything's okay. No one's coming to save us, only you. So I'll stop. You had other questions.
So, thank you very much for this answer. I have a second question, which maybe you can answer better than everybody, mostly everybody in the world. The question is, do you think, with your experience and your background, is it possible to finish such a vaccine from the research to the billions of mass production in this short amount of time?
Yes, I can certainly answer that question. And I'm going to give you the name of another person who can confirm this. So the answer is, of course, no. So I gave an example in my video. If someone told you they've designed, built, tested, and authorized a new jet airliner in under a year, you would laugh, because you've seen these things from Boeing and Airbus, and they take years and years and years. And it's not because people want to go slow, it's because you often can't do Operation B until you've done Operation A and learnt the results, yes? So if you're doing wind tunnel tests, and then you were going to modify the shape of the tail, you can't jump to changing the shape of the tail. You have to do the wind tunnel first, evaluate the results, then make the engineering change. And it's the same sort of thing is true in research. You have to undertake an experiment, observe the results. You may have to redo the experiment under different conditions, get the results, and use that information to amend something, like a formulation or a dose. And then you do it again and again. And the process of clinical testing, for example, my experience was extensive in what's called phase 1 trials, the first exposure to humans. And I would say on average, it took 1 year to go from the intention, the decision to do a volunteer study, to getting the results. 1 year. And that's within the biggest company in the world with very large budgets. 1 year. You have to manufacture the material. You have to test the material to show it is what you want it to make. You may have to confirm its stability over weeks or months so that it's still the same material when you give it to people. You need analytical test systems for all the breakdown products and impurities that might be in that material. You have to write dozens of pages of a protocol. You have to recruit doctors and a study lead to do it. You have to gain legal authorization to do it through ethics committees, not to say management as well. And then you need to actually start recruiting real patients. You can see why doing even a simple thing like a first-in-human study takes you a year. And yet we were told in 10 months, they went from idea, initial research, evaluation, clinical studies, toxicology, manufacture, authorization, and launch. It's laughable. I'm 100% certain it is formally impossible for them to have done what they said they did. So I mentioned the other person, a colleague called Hedley Rees. He's a Welsh guy, Hedley, Hedley. His surname Rees, Rees. And Hedley has spent longer in manufacturing than I have spent in research. And he will tell you that developing merely the analytical methods for a complex biological will take longer than a year. Longer than a year to develop the methods to evaluate what you have in your hands and how it breaks down over time, how consistent it is from batch to batch, and get all of those tests and those results agreed with the regulator over 1 year, just for the manufacturing tests. So he and I are both absolutely certain it cannot be done. So when you hear Bill Gates, that wonderful scientist, telling you that the plan is to get from pathogen to vaccine in 90 days, my blood ran cold, because that might be just fast enough to make toxins, but you can't make a proper, healthcare product in 3 months. The only way you can do it is by not bothering with any of the normal tests. So, ladies and gentlemen, you may remember your doctor, your government, your ministers telling you this injection is perfectly safe in pregnancy. And they told you that in early 2021. I can tell you then and now, no reproductive toxicology has ever been done on these products. If you're old enough, you may remember the thalidomide scandal in about 1960. And it was realized that babies they used to think they were safe in their mother's womb, protected. And we now understand, because they're changing so quickly, they're extremely vulnerable in their mother's wombs. And the rule has been for 60 years, you never ever voluntarily expose a pregnant woman to a novel substance. You just don't do it because they are presumptively toxic to the fetus. So one, we knew that, and that rule was swept aside for no reason, propaganda. And secondly, they told you they were perfectly safe when no testing had been done, and it's still not been done. And worse, I pointed out why I expect them to be toxic, and they have been. So you can either believe the logical argument I've laid out to you, or you can believe the liars in government, and it's up to you. But do remember, if you assume wrong, they're going to murder you. If you follow what I've been saying and I'm wrong, the worst that will happen is you get laughed at. I think I can live with that. I'd love to be wrong. Unfortunately, I'm not wrong. So if you obey the government's orders and pay attention to them, my confident prediction is within 5 years maybe, because they all talk of 2030. I think within 5 years you will lose your freedom, and shortly after that you will lose your life, because there are deeply unpleasant people who down the years have decided that they don't want as many people on the planet anymore, and they have the means to control us completely at the level of digital. Every single movement you make, every transaction you make will be limited by your digital ID and by electronic money. If we allow these systems to land and become established, I think you can see how easy it will be for someone with a database and the ability to write an algorithm. They can control you completely, because you will no longer be a human, Dr. Mike Yeadon. You'll become a QR code. You'll become a dot on the matrix, which is subject to total control. And you don't need any of these things they are telling you about, digital ID, and certainly not these injections. Do you remember when we were coming up to the, in my view, fake authorization of these injections? They said, oh, they're for elderly people. But very soon after, they said, okay, now if you, between 50 and 60 years of age, you can come and get your jab. Then it was 40 to 50. And at that moment, I knew they're going to inject everybody, including babies. And that's what happened. Eventually, in some countries, you couldn't go to school if you weren't injected, or you couldn't go into a public building. It's so mad, because at one hearing, the Pfizer executive, I think she's called Janine Small, something like that, Welsh lady, and she said, oh no, we were moving at the speed of science, remember? They didn't do any tests to see if their injections would reduce transmission. But that was the only reason why you would be forced to have it, so that you wouldn't infect grandma or a stranger, since they knew they didn't do anything to transmission. That, ladies and gentlemen, is because there was nothing to transmit. But that was the basis under which they insisted that you got jabbed for the greater good. Well, there aren't transmissible diseases. The whole history of virology, right back to about 1956, when a gentleman called John Enders was awarded the Nobel Prize for the discovery of the measles virus. I'm afraid it's horrible lies, but absolutely every part of virology is fake. I didn't realize that either until the last few years. So don't worry about being told about viral diseases. What they do is they always assign to an existing disease an imaginary virus. So people who've got a disease of blood clotting or of bleeding, they'll tell you it's Ebola or a hemolytic virus, or basically they're all fake. The diseases are real, but they're not contagious, and they're not caused by novel viruses. But we are so easily frightened of illness and death, I'm afraid, that the scam works almost every time. Personally, I'm no longer frightened of death at all. I've had a good life, and like most people, I've come to terms with the fact that at some point in the future, I won't be here, and I'm okay with that. So why would I worry about between now and then, and let my life be completely controlled by fear? And so I urge you, don't let your life be controlled by fear. Make your own decisions and turn off the television set and never put it back on again. I threw out all of ours 4 years ago, and we never watch any television anymore because it's propaganda. The news is all propaganda, and most of the dramas also are used to engineer social cues to get you used to things that if you were just presented them cold, you would go, that's not right. Like the enormous preponderance of information about transgenderism. It's like, that wasn't there 10 years ago. Do people really think this has suddenly emerged in the human character? It's like, we are being propagandized to no longer recognize our humanity, that there are two sexes, boys and girls, men and women, and those together have babies. Every single baby on the planet, was formed in that way, whatever they like to say. But they've enjoyed casting us adrift from our humanity by literally blowing up this idea that there are men and women and that they together produce babies. It's like, I wouldn't be allowed to say that on the television. I'd be told that I'm transphobic or something. It's like, it's crazy. Even if there are some people who aren't clear about their orientation, but most people are, and nothing has changed, just the propaganda. So I don't watch anything because I then don't have to resist the crazy propaganda. And I say to people, the natural world is still as beautiful as it ever was and miraculous. And most people in your road are not trying to kill you. But some people are. A small number of very wealthy, long-lived families, the ones who start all the international organizations. I've never thought about, where does the United Nations come from, or the World Health Organization, or the EU? It's like someone prompted these things to happen. I'm afraid in all cases, it's the same group of super wealthy, long-lived families and foundations, all of them, all of these 3 and 4 letter, 2, 3, 4 letter supranational organizations, every single one of them, like dozens. The Trilateral Commission, the Committee of Foreign Affairs, every single one of these are globalist bodies, and they're run by the same people. And ultimately, Bank of International Settlements is another one, the World Bank, the IMF. every single one of these, if you go back and study the history of them, you'll find, oh, it's the same names again.
Yep.
Most people won't look, and it never occurred to me to look. But once you start looking, they're not even hiding it. So I asked you to set aside the conclusion, because the conclusion is very frightening. And if you prejudge the conclusion, you won't look at the evidence.
Hi, Mike.
Lots of people have said to me they're not going to look at the evidence because it's too frightening. So
hi, Mike. Can you hear me?
Have a look at the evidence and see whether what I've told you is a better approximation to what's happening in the world, or is it just a series of unconnected events? So that's where I am on that one. Sorry, I spoke a long time. I hope
No, it's fine. Mike, can you hear me? It's Fiona.
Yeah.
You can hear me?
Yeah.
Yes, it's Fiona, by the way. So I'm really happy that you've been live this entire time, live on
Good.
YouTube, still going. We
Fantastic.
had, I think it was one more question. Yeah. So
Okay.
this one. I'll let Martin ask the question because I can't understand his writing.
Thank you. Thank you for your great answers. One last question, which only a so-called conspiracy theorist would ever ask. Do you think, or do you have any information about that there is or are particles like graphene oxide or maybe something like nanobots, could be, in this vaccine? Is the scientific far enough that it could be? Do you have any information? Yes or no? Thank you.
Yeah, I have a little bit. So where it comes to graphene and graphene oxide, I'm aware that there was a research group that became quite famous, I think, in 2020 or 2021. And I did see their report. They missed out one test, something called transmission electron microscopy, or TEM. By sheer coincidence, when I worked in government labs when I was a university student, I did spend half a year in what's called standardization laboratories, which is very dull, but basically involves analyzing a small group of compounds in every way you can, like 20 different methods to analyze morphine, something like that. And then you write it all up, and it's called a monograph in Britain, monograph, and it's the definitive way of detecting a particular substance. And so if you've got an unknown substance, if you put it through one test and you get a result that's consistent with it being morphine, you don't say it's morphine, you say it's consistent with being morphine. You only know it's morphine if you do all of the tests, and it passes all of the tests. So with the graphene and graphene oxide story, what we were told was consistent analytical results consistent with graphene oxide, but they didn't do what I regarded as the gold standard test, which is transmission electron microscopy. And I say that because graphene oxide is a monolayer of carbon atoms, and they are arranged in a hexagonal pattern, a six-sided repeating quilt. If you shine electrons through that sheet, you get a characteristic hexagonal arrangement of bright lights on the photographic plate, and it's unmistakable. You can go and look it up, what TEM for graphene looks like. No one has ever done that test. I came to the conclusion that there wasn't any graphene oxide because you could get that test done, and nobody ever did. So is it possible? I don't know. I don't know why you would do it. Actually, I do have one reason, but I won't repeat it right now because it'll make me sound completely mad. I might tell you in the future. So I don't think graphene oxide is in it. You don't need to put these things in it. They are inherently toxic in the way I described. So why would you add anything else? Nanobots. Now, I'm not a digital engineer. I'm not a robot person. What I am, though, is a biologist. So I'm used to having cells in a test tube or an animal when I was much younger, not very proud of that, in which you would try and form some experiment. Like in cells in a test tube, or a plate, you would add a chemical. Most of the time what happens in biology is things that you didn't expect to happen. Biology is so grey and wonderful and complex that it's not like a computer. If you do a certain thing to a biological system, the chances that it'll do an identical thing, a response, to the last time you did it is like 0. It's ever so variable, it's inherently variable. So I say all of that, the idea that you could create a machine that will self-assemble and then travel somewhere and do something, I think that's sci-fi. So there are some people who are worried that there are these self-assembling nanobots that will control us. Let me just point out logically. If I'm thinking just before I speak, or sometimes I don't think and then I speak, but basically we normally have a thought and almost immediately an action, intention to move your arm, for example, or speak. We've no idea what the thought is. You can't write a formula for it. We don't know where it starts. We don't know how to intervene in it. We can't measure it. We can't monitor it in real time. We don't have an RS-232 plug. So I put it to people that we can't even define what a thought is. We can define at high level things like emotions. So fear, there are characteristic, stereotypical reactions that occur in your body, in your face, in your biochemistry, in your heart rate and so on, your skin, when you're terrified or excited. There are certain characteristic things. So I do think it might be possible to engineer manipulation of your emotions at high level to make you frightened or sleepy or something like that, probably to kill you. But I don't think they could inject thoughts into you. That's completely nuts, because if you don't know what a thought is, if you can't define it and write it down, can't write a program or subroutine to then download it into a person, that's logically nuts. So I'm not worried about those things, Martin, but I'm very worried about the tens of billions of doses of mRNA-based injections that are somewhere in a cold storage in Japan or Germany or Britain or America. Because I don't believe the people who've done this are going to stop. I think our job is to make them change their angle of attack, possibly to delay the attack. And some people think we may already have driven them back by several years. That might be
Mike.
true. And I think we should carry on doing that. I think it's very difficult to expect them just to go home and fold their tents and go away. But
Mike, can you hear me?
Yeah.
I really, 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 really don't want to cut you off. This has been so successful. Okay. Yeah, we've got so few amazing speakers left today, but this has been fantastic. I just want to quickly, whilst you're here, because me and Mike have worked together for a while now, I want to thank Martin and Britta, the organisers of today, for facilitating you joining us, not only playing your video totally uncensored and uncut, but for allowing you to be here, to speak live and to say everything that you've needed to say.
So I second all that you said. And you've been a wonderful colleague to work with, a great person too.
Thank you so much, Mike, for joining us. I just wanted to mention, before we say thank you and goodbye, Mike is heavily censored on social media, and for the sake of people also watching on YouTube, you can follow Mike on Telegram. It's Dr. Mike Yeadon Solo Channel. Technically all one word. Oh, there we are. Fabulous. Dr. Mike Yeadon Solo Channel. And on CoviLeaks on Twitter or X, CoviLeaks. All of Mike's content will be uploaded to Twitter. And I think we've all got an obligation to share it. So that's all I'm going to say. Thank you again, Mike. Thank you, everyone, for watching. And thank you, Martin and Britta. You've been amazing today. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Just one last question, just to give you the information. Your name is known in German-speaking countries, but not everybody knows these brilliant ideas and also what you have to say. So I hope we in future maybe can make something like an interview and try to get this also in other languages with AI. We want to get it to French, to Italian, and to other languages, that your information spread mostly in more languages, in more countries. And I hope you have time for interview together with me and other persons, hopefully.
Yeah, I would be very happy to do that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you very much. Goodbye. Goodbye.
Some of the key figures in the movement, as you've never seen them before, painted by me, Jake Fern, with half of my brain concentrating on making a painting and half my brain concentrating on having a conversation. Do I succeed at either or both? You be the judge. Tune in on Tuesday the 17th of December for the first instalment of Resistance GB's 1,000 Words with David Icke.
Oh, there you go. Oh, that's far better than I thought. Hello. This is great.